Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study of the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are in 1 Kings chapter 12. Now, we're kind of shifting in the narrative, the story here. Up until this time, we saw the king Saul. And then we went through the reign of David, and then the reign of Solomon. Now, all three reigned in the entire nation of Israel. Okay, and now what we're going to see is Solomon's son, and this kind of, so we're going to get more into the reigns, the kind of going back and forth of the kings of both the northern and southern kingdom. Now, this is going to come about in this chapter here, and what I want to bring up is show you kind of how we're going to go with this. This is like a chart of the kings of Israel. And we're going to Jeroboam. We're going to see this Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Now, if you notice, one says the kings of Israel, and then the other one says the kings of Judah. In this chapter, one of the kind of most sad things is that Rehoboam, and you see the king of Judah, Rehoboam, who is the son of Solomon, right? I don't know why they're saying first king here. I know why they're saying it. I'm sorry. They're probably saying first king from the division. Okay. Now, but Rehoboam, who is going to turn out to be a fool. His father was the wisest man ever to live, and Rehoboam did not get any of that. Wisdom, and so because of his foolishness, the nation will be split into two kingdoms, which is kind of interesting. As in America, at the sidebar, we certainly should learn the lessons of what a civil war can do, and what eventually what happens in this case with Israel. You have two separate kingdoms. So at the time that Solomon, remember his death, as he passes into to reign over to Rehoboam. Okay, Rehoboam makes a dumb decision, and then this guy Jeroboam, all right, he takes and he leads Israel. Now Jeroboam, if you kind of remember, when Solomon, in his wisdom, was really just fell into hard sin, he fell into idolatry. Through his 700 wives, he started erecting pagan worship, actually pagan worship. And so he fell hard. And so God rebuked Solomon. And as a result, God appeared to Jeroboam and told him he was going to take 10 tribes. God was going to give him 10 tribes. And then the other two would be left with Rehoboam, because God said that he wasn't going to extinguish David's seed. And so as we move forward, then we're going to see this kind of going back and forth. Now, from the king's perspective, first and second kings, you see more of an emphasis on the kings of Israel. So you see Jeroboam, Nadab, Baasha, Elah, Shuri, Zimri, Ormi, Ahab, and of course we're really going to get to know Ahab and his wicked wife Jezebel. And you see all these kings from the king of Israel. Then of course from Rehoboam, some of the more popular kings: Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joash, Uzziah, Hezekiah, okay, Manasseh. You look down there. In fact, Manasseh would be probably one of the most wickedest kings. And he had a very interesting story, by the way. Excuse me. He had a very interesting story. The wickedness during his time was so great that God says, there is no turning back from the destruction of Israel. Yet Manasseh himself will repent of the incredible wickedness that he engages in. Josiah is another interesting king because his death is prophesied 200 years before he's born. And we're going to see that. But he would die at a young age because, again, foolishness. But anyway, this is kind of a list of the kings of the northern, what's called the northern kingdoms and the southern kingdoms. Now, just so you may know that the northern part of the northern kingdom is the region of Galilee, where Jesus would be raised. Okay, Jerusalem was in the southern part. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, cities like that. So what we're going to see is you're going to see this back and forth. And I'm going to keep, obviously I'm going to keep this chart around because you can kind of see the list. But you're going to see kind of going back and forth when we get, as we move through the kings of Israel. Okay. And First and Second Kings kind of focus more on that kingdom. We will see these other kings here listed. But also, we're going to see, as I said before, more and more political, from the political aspect. Okay? And then when we get to Chronicles, we're going to see the kings of Judah, more the focus on the kings of Judah, but yet they will mention the kings of Israel. So First and Second Kings focus more on the northern kings, and then First and Second Chronicles focus more on the southern kingdoms. Okay, the kingdom of Judah, which is kind of interesting in terms of the mindset. And I'm going to do a little sidebar here between these two kings here, kind of the mindset here, because one would be more spiritual than the other. As I said, as this is narrated, the northern kings, we're going to see more political. And the reason why I say that is because when we go through history, especially when we get to what's called the medieval times, you see exactly this going back and forth between a political mindset and more so a spiritual or religious mindset. The popes basically said, hey, we're the vicar of Christ, so therefore we have more authority. Whereas the kings, the kings in terms of Europe and all that, basically said, no, God gave us the king's authority, so our authority trumps yours. And Pope says, no, vicar trumps your kingdom. And what is kind of interesting to note about this is that this is why when you get to the Americas, why the freedoms, you have the freedom of religion, the freedom of press, the freedom, all these freedoms were to get away from the corruption that was there. In other words, when they said the freedom of press, because of doing, put it like this, you could not criticize the king or the pope. You would destroy your life. So when they had the press, they would say, okay, the press is what the king says. Okay? So that, again, I'm just showing you the mindset of that, which is kind of eerily the same, right? The mindset of why and why we should really, really, really appreciate our freedoms, because you see, back then, you like now, if I wanted to curse the president, I could do that because I have freedom to do that. Yeah, you can't do that. You couldn't do that back then. All right, so let's get in it. The 1 Kings chapter 12 says, then Rehoboam. Now Rehoboam is Solomon's son. Solomon has passed away. The kingdom has passed to Rehoboam. He says Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all of Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. And when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard about it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon's presence, Jeroboam stayed in Egypt. Now Jeroboam, you have to kind of go back to the previous chapters, I should say, and you will see that Solomon tried to kill him because God had prophesied, because of Solomon's turning to idolatry. God said, hey, you have messed up real bad. I'm tearing the kingdom out of your hand, and I'm going to give 10 of these tribes to Jeroboam. When Solomon heard about it, he tried to kill Jeroboam. Jeroboam flees to Egypt. Okay, so now Solomon is dead. His son is taken over, and he's kind of still staying in Egypt, but he's going to come back. We're going to come back to him. Verse 3. They summoned him and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel. Now remember, they send for him. So now he's sort of the leader, as God said. But notice interesting here that he comes. Notice this. He said they summoned him and Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam. Your father made our yoke difficult. Therefore lighten your father's harsh service and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Now stop. This here should be a lesson for every politician. This should be a lesson for every politician. During Solomon's reign, now I told you to file this in the back of your head. It was a glorious time, the building of the temple. But if you remember, he had this massive labor force, right? So this massive labor, I think it was almost 100,000 men of all kinds of trades and stone cutters and whatever, laborers, whatever. So you had that. Now think about that. You had to pay this man, you had to feed him and all that. So there was just a tremendous cost. Then you also had Solomon, and remember how it talks about each tribe had to supply the king a certain amount of ration. So the whole point is that somewhere somebody had to pay for that. In other words, you had to come up with that. Dan had to come up with, and Naphtali, and all these tribes had to come up with Solomon's taxes. Okay? And this is what they're talking about. Your father, man, great king, right? Great king, but he imposed a harsh tax. Tonight, here they come. Now, it's interesting that Jeroboam comes to them after the prophecy that was given him. In other words, he doesn't come to take the king. He actually comes to say, hey, we'll submit to you if you just lighten your father's harsh service. This should be a lesson right here to every kingdom, every politician. Sadly, it's not. Sadly, you have politicians today that you see that they think, and by the way, I live in Illinois, and I can tell you the mindset of I can tell you the mindset of politicians. Okay, the mindset of politicians is this. And I live, you go to, and obviously, the larger cities are affected by this. So I live in the Chicago area, and I can tell you, Chicago has seen a decrease in population because the taxes. Excuse me. And their mentality is, this is, by the way, this is just not, it's all levels of government. Their mentality is, so let's say you got $1 billion worth of taxes, they blow $1 billion. Their resolve is raise the taxes more. And so, and I'm telling you, that's just, it doesn't matter Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter city, county, state, federal, doesn't matter. That's how they think. And one reason why is because there is an endless amount of tax revenue. Okay? An endless amount of tax revenue. That's why they don't care. So, they're not there really to serve the people, and especially during this time, they certainly wasn't there to serve the people, but to serve themselves. Okay? So verse 5 says, Rehoboam replied, and by the way, he's 41 years old at this time. So, okay, he's 41 years old. So Rehoboam replied, go home for 3 days and then return to me. So the people left. Okay, now I'm going to kind of stop here. I'm going to pick it up here with chapter 2 because I really want to kind of unpack this, because I'm going to run out of time. So they make their plea. And notice what he said too. He said, notice what they said. If you lighten the load, it was heavy your father put on us. Solomon was kind of a shrewd person, if you think about it. He was very wise, but with that, he was shrewd. Look at how he did. Remember how he did Harem. The Harem's like, hey man, we're going to really, your father was great. I mean, he just blessed David with all of these, the materials and supplies. And the 10, and then Solomon gives them 10 crappy cities. Solomon didn't care, right? He was a very shrewd person. And as I said before, all the tribes had to contribute this heavy cut. Solomon didn't care. If Rehoboam was smart, and he won't be, and notice what they said, we will serve you if you do this. We will serve you if you do this. That should have been his clue right there. That should have been his clue to say, yeah, let's take care of the people. Let's secure our reign. Okay, I'm going to pick it up with this next time, and then and move on, because Rehoboam turns out to be a fool when he rejects this. Okay. Alright guys, don't forget to like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button. Want to throw in a comment? All comments are welcome. Alright, see you in the next study.